The great halls of the Vael'Koth citadel shimmered with ethereal light, its arched ceilings reflecting the brilliance of 1,000 worlds. Delegates from across the galaxy gathered in the grand chamber, their robes embroidered with the insignia of their home systems, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and ceremony. Today was to be historic, the day humanity finally joined the Vael'Koth Alliance as full members. A culmination of centuries of dedication, struggle, and unwavering belief in the promise of unity. Ambassador Elias Venn stood at the head of the human delegation, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. His uniform, an immaculate black and gold ensemble bearing the sigil of the United Terran Federation, felt heavier than ever. He had spent decades navigating the intricate web of galactic diplomacy, negotiating trade deals, mediating conflicts, and proving, again and again, that humanity was worthy. The dream of his people, the dream of unity, was finally within reach. Around him, his fellow delegates murmured in hushed voices, some exchanging hopeful glances, others too nervous to speak. The weight of history pressed down on them. Humanity had worked tirelessly for this moment. They had fought in the Alliance's wars, shared their technology, built entire colonies under the Alliance's banner. There was no logical reason they would be denied. The High Council chamber was an awe-inspiring sight, an amphitheater of ascending tiers where representatives from each member species sat in judgment. At the center of it all was the Speaker's podium, a grand dais where the ruling body of the Alliance, the Triarchs, sat in solemn dignity. The three oldest and most powerful races of the Alliance, the Vael, the Kothari, and the Zelvarn, presided over the gathering, their towering forms exuding an air of unassailable authority. Venn's gaze met that of High Triarch Drenvari, the ancient Vael who had overseen the Alliance for over 2 centuries. His violet-hued skin was wrinkled with age, his piercing yellow eyes betraying no emotion. For years, Drenvari had been a patron of humanity's cause, an advocate for their ascension. Or so Venn had believed. The chamber quieted as Drenvari rose, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustic enhancers. Honored delegates of the Vael'Koth Alliance, today we stand on the precipice of change. The question before us is whether humanity, after centuries of service, shall be granted full membership in our esteemed collective. A murmur of voices rippled through the assembly. This was mere formality. The decision had to be unanimous, but humanity had proven itself beyond question. They had bled for the Alliance, built for it, sacrificed for it. Drenvari turned to his fellow Triarchs, his expression unreadable. Let the vote commence. A holographic display materialized above the dais, illuminating the results as they came in. The minor species voted first, those who had once been in humanity's position, seeking inclusion, striving for legitimacy. One by one, the votes appeared. Yes, yes, yes. Venn exhaled softly, allowing a flicker of hope to ignite in his chest. They had allies. They had champions. Then came the votes of the senior member races, the power brokers of the Alliance. No, no, no. Venn's breath caught. A tide of unease swept through the chamber as the pattern became clear. His pulse pounded in his ears as the final 3 votes were cast. No, no, no. 12-7. Humanity had been denied. For a moment, there was only silence. Then whispers, shocked murmurs, a few gasps of disbelief. Even some of the minor species looked stunned. Venn forced himself to remain still, his jaw tightening, his fingers clenching into a fist. He turned his gaze back to Drenvari, searching for some kind of explanation, some sign that this was a mistake. Drenvari's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. It is the decision of this council that humanity shall remain as an associate member of the Vael'Koth Alliance. You shall retain trade privileges and diplomatic presence, but full membership is denied. Venn stepped forward before he could stop himself. On what grounds? We have upheld every standard. We have honored every treaty, met every challenge. A Kothari delegate, his scaled visage reflecting the golden light of the chamber, interjected coldly. Humanity is unpredictable, a volatile species prone to rebellion, to violence. It is in your nature. You are a destabilizing force, one the Alliance cannot afford to fully integrate. Ben's heart pounded. This is a betrayal. You led us to believe. Drenvari raised a hand. The decision is final. This session is adjourned. The chamber erupted in noise as security personnel moved toward the human delegation. Ven could hardly hear the words being spoken to him, the demands for humanity's immediate withdrawal. He turned to his team. Some were frozen in shock, others seething with fury. As they were escorted from the chamber, the full weight of what had just happened settled over him. This was not just rejection. It was exile. Humanity had spent centuries proving itself, and in the end, it had all been for nothing. The news spread faster than light itself. Across the colonies, celebrations turned to riots. The hope of unity was torn away, leaving behind only anger, betrayal, and the sting of humiliation. The dream of ascension had died in the cold halls of the Vael'Koth Citadel. But something else was born in its place. A fire. A fury that would not be extinguished. The broadcast was everywhere. Every human colony, every ship, every outpost received the transmission from the Vael'Koth Citadel. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a public humiliation. Humanity had not simply been denied membership. They had been cast out, discarded like an unwanted tool. The response was immediate and visceral. On Terra Nova, the largest and most prosperous of humanity's colonies, the streets were filled with protesters. Men, women, and children who had spent their lives believing in the dream of the Alliance now stood together in defiance. Flags of the United Terran Federation burned, not in contempt for their own people, but for the system that had betrayed them. Signs demanding justice, fairness, and retaliation were held high as chants of defiance echoed through the capital city. Ambassador Elias Ven stood in the shadow of the UTF embassy, his expression grim. The news had reached him hours before the public announcement, but even with that time to prepare, he still felt numb. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the way it had happened. The cold dismissal, the casual stripping of everything humanity had fought for. The Triarchs had never seen them as equals. Not truly. He turned to Commander Helena Rains, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United Terran Fleet stationed in the sector. Her uniform was crisp, but the fire in her eyes betrayed the barely contained rage she felt. "This isn't just an insult, Elias," she said, her voice low but forceful. "This is a declaration of subjugation. They want us to stay in our place. They want to make sure we never rise." Ven exhaled sharply. "And what do you propose?" "War." Rains didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze to the thousands of protesters gathered outside. "They already started the war. We're just deciding whether or not we're going to fight it." The protests turned into riots within hours. The Alliance had stationed security forces on human colonies, ostensibly for mutual defense, but now they acted as an occupying force. On Luna Prime, armored soldiers fired stun rounds into crowds. On Epsilon Eridani, human workers were forcibly removed from spaceports they had built. On Europa, the colonial governor was arrested for sedition after refusing to recognize the Alliance's ruling. And then came the spark that ignited the fire. On Terra Nova, a group of human protesters marched toward the Alliance Command Center, chanting for their rights. They were unarmed, peaceful. But the Vael'Koth forces stationed there did not see citizens. They saw a threat. Panic spread among the alien guards, and without warning, the first shot was fired. The first casualty was a young woman, barely 20, shot in the chest. Her body crumpled to the ground, blood pooling on the marble steps of the command center. For a moment, there was silence, stunned disbelief that anyone would go so far. And then, the dam broke. The crowd surged forward. Rocks, makeshift weapons, and sheer human fury crashed against the Alliance troops. Soldiers opened fire, but it only fueled the rage. A Vael officer was dragged down, his armor torn from his body. His life ended beneath the fists of those he sought to control. The command center burned. The massacre was broadcast across every human system. Within hours, entire colonies erupted in rebellion. Ships defected from the Alliance Navy, crews declaring allegiance to their own people. Supply chains were seized, orbital stations captured. Humanity, once fractured by politics and distance, was now united by a singular cause: revenge. On Mars, the United Terran Fleet's High Command held an emergency session. Admiral Lucius Kane, a legend among humanity's military, watched the reports with a dark expression. "They forced our hand," he said. "We either fight now, on our own terms, or we wait for them to strangle us to death." Across the table, Defense Minister Alina Volkov nodded. "The question isn't whether we fight," she said. "It's how." A new symbol began to appear, on ships, on armor, on banners raised in defiance. It was not the sigil of the United Terran Federation, nor that of any individual colony. It was something new, a clenched fist wreathed in flame. Humanity's chains had been broken, and now they were ready for war. The first official shots of the war were not fired by the United Terran Fleet. They were not fired by a seasoned general or an experienced tactician. They came from a single stolen freighter, retrofitted with torpedoes by desperate hands, piloted by a crew of former miners and ex-military officers who had lost everything. The Icarus, a once modest cargo hauler, ambushed an Alliance supply convoy near the Tau Ceti trade routes. The Vael'Koth escort ships had not expected resistance. They had grown accustomed to humanity's submission. By the time they realized they were under attack, 2 of their frigates had already been torn apart by crude but effective missile strikes. The Icarus was ultimately destroyed, but not before taking down 3 enemy vessels with it. It was not a strategic victory, but it was something far more powerful: a symbol. Within days, similar attacks erupted across human space. Raids on isolated outposts, sabotages of fuel depots, and daring heists against Alliance-controlled shipyards. What began as spontaneous, disorganized acts of defiance rapidly transformed into a full-fledged insurgency. The United Terran Fleet, still hesitant to declare open war, found itself drawn in regardless. Defecting captains, rogue admirals, and entire battle groups abandoned their posts in the name of humanity's survival. The first real battle came at Epsilon Eridani, one of the last major shipyards under tenuous human control. The Alliance sought to seize it, to prevent humanity from arming itself, but they had underestimated the resolve of the workers and ex-soldiers who had already begun fortifying the station. When the Alliance's fleet arrived, expecting a swift occupation, they were met with a barrage of ion cannons, railguns, and a swarm of human-piloted fighters. For the first time, an Alliance fleet retreated from battle. The Vael'Koth Alliance, confident in its control, had not anticipated the speed at which the rebellion would spread. Their analysts had predicted resistance, but they had not foreseen the sheer ferocity with which humanity fought back. More concerningly, they had not expected cracks to form within their own ranks. The Zelvarn, one of the Triarch species, began questioning whether humanity's expulsion had been a mistake. They had long admired human adaptability and tactical ingenuity. While the official stance of the Triarchs remained firm, internal factions within the Zelvarn military hesitated in their attacks, with some commanders even defecting. Other species within the Alliance, those that had been relegated to second-class status, much like humanity had been, started whispering among themselves. If the Alliance could betray humanity so easily, what stopped them from doing the same to others? Protests, though still rare, erupted in alien-controlled colonies. What had once been a matter of humanity's exile was evolving into something much larger, a revolution against the Alliance's rigid caste system. Even as the resistance gained momentum, humanity lacked a singular figure to unite them. That changed when Admiral Lucius Kane, the highest-ranking human officer still recognized within the Alliance Navy, defected. Rather than allowing himself to be stripped of command, he led a mutiny aboard the UTS Dominion, seizing the battleship along with a dozen other vessels loyal to humanity's cause. The battle group disappeared into the void, emerging weeks later to strike at the Alliance's supply lines. Kane's defection was the moment the war became inevitable. No longer was this a loose collection of insurgents. Now, humanity had generals, commanders, and entire fleets prepared to fight. His message, broadcast to every human world and to the far reaches of the Alliance itself, was simple. For too long, we have fought for a seat at their table. For too long, we have sought their approval, their acceptance, their permission to exist as equals. No more. They would have us kneel. They would have us disappear into the forgotten pages of history. But we are not so easily erased. This is not a plea for recognition. This is a declaration of war. His speech electrified the rebellion. Humanity was no longer simply fighting for inclusion. Now, they were fighting to rule. The Alliance, finally realizing that this was no mere insurgency, responded with brute force. They mobilized entire fleets, deploying shock troops to human-controlled worlds in an attempt to crush the rebellion before it could spread further. Cities burned under orbital bombardments. Colonies were declared rogue states, their people branded as traitors. Every captured rebel was executed as an example. But the Alliance had made a critical miscalculation. They believed that overwhelming force would break humanity's will. Instead, it hardened them. The cycle of violence escalated. Resistance leaders coordinated massive counterattacks, using knowledge of their own worlds to outmaneuver the technologically superior Alliance forces. The war zones stretched across dozens of systems, and for every human stronghold that fell, another two rose in its place. The Alliance had expected a war of weeks or months. Now, it was clear that this would be a war of years. The first real blow against the Alliance came at Scifi Station, a critical logistics hub that supplied the Vael'Koth military forces in the region. A coalition of defected human warships, armed civilian vessels, and alien mercenaries launched a daring assault. In a chaotic and brutal engagement, the station was captured intact. The significance was immediate. Humanity now had a forward base, a place to repair and rearm, a symbol of defiance that the Alliance could not ignore. The victory at Scifi Station was more than just strategic, it was psychological. It proved that the rebellion was no fleeting insurrection. It was a movement that could stand against the might of the Alliance and win. And it was only the beginning. The flames of war had spread far beyond humanity's worlds. What had begun as a rebellion was now something greater. It was not just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the very nature of the galaxy's power structure. The Vael'Koth Alliance had underestimated humanity's ability to endure and adapt, but they had failed to see an even greater danger: the seeds of discord sown within their own ranks. The cracks in the Alliance had begun as whispers, doubts from the lesser member species who had long accepted their place beneath the ruling elite. But humanity's defiance had shown them something new: the possibility of rebellion. The Zelvarn were the first to waver. Their crystalline minds were slow to change, but they prided themselves on logic and adaptability. The rapidity of humanity's rise, their refusal to break under overwhelming force, forced the Zelvarn High Council to reconsider their loyalty to the Alliance. Some within their ranks suggested diplomacy, while others feared that if humanity could not be controlled, they must be exterminated. Meanwhile, the Kothari, one of the founding species of the Alliance, demanded humanity's total annihilation. Their war fleets burned human colonies indiscriminately, believing that through sheer brutality, they could stamp out the uprising before it grew further. But every world they crushed only fueled humanity's hatred, solidifying their resolve. And then there were the oppressed races, the dozens of species relegated to second-class status, bound by the same systems that had denied humanity. Many had never considered open resistance, but now, with humanity fighting back, they began to see their own chains. The first to openly defect was the Darvoth, a species of traders and industrialists who had long chafed under Vael'Koth regulations. They did not join the war as warriors, but as suppliers, smuggling weapons, resources, and ships to the human war effort. Then came the Ulnari, a warrior race whose honor had been slighted by centuries of servitude. They pledged themselves to humanity's cause, their fleets launching daring strikes against Alliance-controlled sectors. The war was no longer humanity against the Vael'Koth Alliance. It was rebellion against Empire. Realizing that the conflict was escalating beyond their control, the Triarchs of the Alliance made a drastic decision. They could no longer afford to treat the rebellion as an isolated insurrection. They declared total war. Fleet movements tripled. The most ruthless generals were given full command, unburdened by laws of war or diplomacy. Planets that harbored defectors were razed to the ground. Entire populations were relocated to prison colonies. Humanity and its newfound allies responded in kind. The battles grew bloodier. Once strategic strikes turned into system-wide engagements. No longer were human ships hiding in the shadows. They were taking worlds, seizing shipyards, and dismantling the infrastructure of the Alliance itself. The war was no longer defensive. It had become a conquest. Giralli's Prime was one of the strongest Alliance-held planets in the Outer Rim, a military stronghold that had never fallen to an enemy force. It was here that the Alliance believed they could finally crush the rebellion. They massed their fleets, deploying ground troops to entrench themselves in the cities, daring humanity to attack. Admiral Lucius Kane, now the de facto leader of humanity's war effort, accepted the challenge. With a coalition of human warships, defected Zelvarn fleets, and Ulnari warriors, the rebellion launched a massive assault. The battle raged for weeks, with heavy losses on both sides. In a daring maneuver, a human strike team infiltrated the planetary defenses, sabotaging the orbital stations that controlled the defense grid. The moment the shields fell, the final assault began. By the time the dust settled, Giralli's Prime had fallen. The once impenetrable fortress of the Alliance was now in human hands. The loss sent shockwaves through the galaxy. If Giralli's Prime could fall, no world was safe. Not all who flocked to humanity's cause did so out of loyalty. Some came seeking power. Some came to settle old grudges. The rebellion was no longer a singular force. It was a coalition, a delicate balance of different species with different goals. Among them was the enigmatic Osvari Syndicate, a shadowy network of spies and assassins who had once worked for the Alliance. They saw opportunity in chaos and offered their services to humanity for a price. Their information proved invaluable, but their loyalty remained in question. And then there were the factions within humanity itself. The United Terran Federation was no longer the sole governing body. Rogue admirals, planetary warlords, and independent leaders all had their own visions for what would come after victory. Some fought for freedom, others for dominance. The war had begun as a fight for survival. Now it was something else entirely. The old order of the Vael'Koth Alliance was crumbling, but what would replace it remained uncertain. One thing, however, was clear. Humanity was no longer fighting to be included. They were fighting to rule. The war had dragged on longer than anyone had anticipated. What the Vael'Koth Alliance had once considered a mere insurrection had evolved into a full-scale galactic conflict. Planets had changed hands. Entire fleets had been lost. The corridors of power, once unshakable, now trembled under the weight of a future they could no longer predict. But if the war had been grueling for the Alliance, it had been transformative for humanity. What had begun as scattered uprisings, desperate skirmishes, and improvised tactics had solidified into something formidable, a true war machine. The fractured remnants of the United Terran Federation had reorganized into the Terran Dominion, a militarized government with one singular focus: total victory. Admiral Lucius Kane now commanded a battle-hardened fleet that rivaled any the Vael'Koth had ever faced. His officers were no longer just rebels, they were conquerors. The makeshift armies of resistance fighters had become a disciplined force. Humanity was no longer merely fighting to survive. They were waging war with the cold efficiency of a species that had been tempered by betrayal. Faced with mounting losses, the Vael'Koth Alliance had no choice but to retaliate with overwhelming force. The High Triarchs assembled the largest armada in the history of their empire, a fleet designed to deliver a decisive blow to humanity's rebellion. Their target, New Avalon, the newly fortified human stronghold located on the fringes of Alliance space. The Vael'Koth strategy was simple: hit humanity with everything they had, break their morale, and force them back into submission. The fleet, numbering over 1,000 warships, moved into position, expecting an easy victory. But Cain had anticipated them. Instead of engaging the Vael'Koth in open battle, he lured them into a carefully orchestrated trap. Using a combination of decoy ships, false intelligence, and precision strikes, the Terran Dominion led the enemy fleet into the Ophion Nebula, a region of space where visibility was limited and navigational systems failed. Then, the ambush began. Human warships, using their knowledge of the nebula's volatile energy currents, launched a devastating counterattack. The once mighty Alliance fleet, caught in a maelstrom of ion storms and surprise strikes, suffered catastrophic losses. Ships lost coordination, their formations collapsing as humanity picked them apart piece by piece. The once mighty Vael'Koth command structure, so reliant on order and discipline, crumbled under the relentless assault. By the time the battle was over, the largest fleet ever assembled by the Vael'Koth Alliance had been reduced to wreckage. What was meant to be humanity's destruction had instead become the Alliance's greatest defeat. The tides of war had turned. The loss at Ophion sent shockwaves through the Vael'Koth government. The illusion of their invincibility had been shattered. For the first time in recorded history, the ruling Triarchs were no longer in agreement. The Zelvarn, once firm supporters of the war, began questioning their involvement. If humanity had managed to defeat the largest Alliance fleet ever assembled, perhaps they had earned their place not just as equals, but as rulers. Some factions within the Zelvarn military even opened secret negotiations with Cain, exploring the possibility of defection. The Kothari, on the other hand, demanded an escalation. They called for the deployment of planetary purging weapons, devices designed to erase entire populations. But such a move would require the approval of the full Triarch Council, and the Vael, the most politically dominant of the three, were hesitant. Mass genocide was not only morally indefensible, but strategically dangerous. If they used such weapons against humanity, what would stop other rebellious species from fearing the same fate and rising up in kind? Meanwhile, on the fringes of the Alliance, more and more species saw an opportunity. The Ulnari, humanity's most prominent alien allies, launched their own offensives, striking at vulnerable Alliance outposts. The Darvoth doubled their supply efforts to the rebellion, ensuring that humanity never ran out of weapons, ships, or resources. Even formerly neutral factions began considering their options. The war was no longer just humanity against the Alliance. It was chaos versus order, and order was losing. The war took on a new brutality after Ophion. The Vael'Koth, desperate to regain control, abandoned traditional rules of engagement. They bombarded human-held worlds indiscriminately. Cities were reduced to rubble. Civilian transports were intercepted and destroyed. Anyone suspected of aiding the rebellion was executed. But humanity responded in kind. Strike teams infiltrated high-value Alliance worlds, assassinating key military and political figures. Entire fleets were hijacked, their crews left stranded in deep space. Terran warlords, once dismissed as rogue elements, became terrifyingly effective conquerors, seizing Vael'Koth-controlled systems and enforcing human rule. Even within humanity's ranks, the lines between honor and vengeance blurred. Some factions within the rebellion pushed for absolute destruction, calling for the extermination of the Vael'Koth species entirely. Others, like Admiral Cain, knew that if humanity lost its restraint, they would become no better than those they fought against. The question was no longer if humanity would win. It was what kind of rulers they would become. The Vael'Koth Alliance was crumbling. Their fleets were shattered, their leaders divided, their grip on power slipping with every battle. But they were not yet defeated. The High Triarchs, recognizing the dire state of their war effort, prepared a desperate gambit. If they could not win through traditional warfare, they would resort to subterfuge. A covert team of elite Vael assassins was dispatched with one mission: eliminate Lucius Cain and the other key leaders of the Terran Dominion. At the same time, diplomatic envoys were sent to the Zelvarn, offering them greater power within the Alliance in exchange for betraying humanity. The final stage of the war was approaching. Victory was within humanity's grasp, but whether they would seize it through diplomacy, conquest, or annihilation remained uncertain. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The war that had begun as humanity's desperate rebellion had now become the death knell of an empire. The Vael'Koth Alliance, once an unshakable power in the galaxy, teetered on the edge of collapse. Entire fleets had been annihilated. Core worlds, once thought untouchable, had fallen to the relentless advance of the Terran Dominion and its growing coalition of defectors and revolutionaries. The once mighty High Triarchs now ruled from a position of fear. The Zelvarn had withdrawn their fleets, their leadership fracturing between those who sought neutrality and those who saw the inevitability of human rule. The Kothari, ever the warmongers, demanded a last stand, a final, apocalyptic strike that would either erase humanity or doom the Alliance entirely. The Vael, the architects of the Empire, now whispered of surrender in private chambers, though they dared not speak the word publicly. But surrender was not an option that humanity intended to offer. The heart of the Alliance was the fortress world of Vael'Koth, a planet encased in layers of defense stations, planetary shields, and an armada of warships drawn from the last remnants of the Empire's once formidable fleet. If the Dominion could take Vael'Koth, the war would be over. There would be no more doubt, no more resistance. Admiral Lucius Cain knew this was the final push. Every major fleet under humanity's banner, Terran, Zelvarn defectors, Ulnari warriors, Darvoth industrialists, assembled for what would be the largest battle in known history. For 3 days, the Dominion's forces pounded at the planet's defenses, methodically eliminating the outer rings of defense stations, cutting off reinforcements, and launching precision strikes to cripple enemy supply chains. But the Alliance did not go quietly. The Kothari warlords led suicidal charges, hurling battleships at human dreadnoughts with reckless fury. Vael'Koth shock troopers fought to the last, refusing to surrender even as their lines were overrun. The planetary shields held firm against the relentless bombardment until humanity used their deadliest weapon. The Inferno Protocol, a scorched earth strategy that the Dominion had devised but never deployed, was put into effect. Instead of breaking through Vael'Roth's defenses with brute force, a small strike team infiltrated the planet using experimental stealth ships. Their mission was to take control of the planetary shield generators and disable the automated defenses, leaving the world vulnerable. Leading the operation was Commander Helena Rains, one of Cain's most trusted officers. Under cover of the orbital chaos, Rains and her team landed within the heart of the Vael'Koth Military Command Center. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters battle that saw entire city blocks reduced to rubble. Against all odds, Rains' team succeeded. The shields fell, the planetary cannons went silent, and the Dominion's fleet descended upon Vael'Koth like a hammer of the gods. The bombardment of Vael'Koth lasted hours. Skyscrapers crumbled, the grand palaces of the Triarchs burned, and the once glistening capital of the Alliance became a ruin. As Dominion troops landed on the surface, the remnants of the Vael'Koth military made one last attempt to resist, but it was hopeless. The planet had fallen. With their capital lost, their fleets shattered, and their leaders either dead or in hiding, the Alliance ceased to exist. With the war over, the question now loomed: what comes next? Humanity had won, but victory was not the same as peace. The Dominion now controlled vast swathes of former Alliance territory, but governance was another battle entirely. Some factions within the Dominion, particularly the Ulnari and Darvoth, called for a new, fairer system, one where all species could stand as equals under humanity's leadership. Others, more radical elements within the Dominion, argued for complete subjugation or even eradication of those who had once oppressed them. And then there were the warlords. Throughout the war, independent human factions had risen, claiming territories and ruling them with absolute power. Some of these warlords had been instrumental in the fight against the Alliance. Now, they had no intention of giving up their fiefdoms. The Dominion faced an uncomfortable truth. Humanity had fought to rule. But who would rule humanity? Admiral Kane stood in the ruins of Vael'Koth's grand citadel, watching as the city smoldered beneath the twilight sky. He had spent his entire life fighting for this moment. He had led fleets, orchestrated battles, and watched countless lives be lost in the name of victory. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt uncertain. A message came through his personal comm, a request for negotiation from the surviving Vael leadership. Not as rulers, not as diplomats, but as refugees seeking terms of surrender and survival. Kane had a choice to make. Would humanity build something greater? Or would they become the very tyrants they had fought to overthrow? The war was over, but the battles were far from finished. Vael'Koth lay in ruins, its towering spires reduced to smoldering rubble. The once mighty Vael'Koth Alliance was shattered, its leaders either dead, imprisoned, or pleading for mercy. Across the galaxy, humanity stood victorious. They had not just survived, they had conquered. But the question now loomed, what came next? The Terran Dominion controlled more territory than any human government had ever dreamed of. The former territories of the Alliance stretched before them like a vast, conquered frontier. Planets once ruled by the Vael, the Kothari, and the Zelvarn were now under humanity's rule. The alien species who had once dismissed humanity, who had voted against them, who had tried to crush them, now they were at their mercy. In the ruins of Vael'Koth, Admiral Lucius Kane stood before his war council. What had once been a united force, bound by the need for survival, was now splintering. The war had forged leaders, some who sought peace, and others who thirsted for dominance. Commander Helena Rains, the hero of the siege of Vael'Koth, stood at his side. "We have a choice, Lucius," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "We can lead these people. Show them that humanity's rise does not mean their extinction. Or we finish what we started," interrupted Lord Marshal Orion Voss, the most ruthless of the Dominion's generals. "The Vael'Koth never gave us mercy. We should return the favor. They must kneel, or they must burn." A murmur of agreement ran through part of the War Council. Many had lost families, homes, entire worlds to the Alliance's cruelty. The call for vengeance was strong. But another voice spoke. Minister Alina Volkov, once a diplomat before the war, turned her into a strategist, stepped forward. "If we rule with the same tyranny the Vael'Koth did, then we become them." Across former Alliance space, planets that had once enjoyed prosperity under the Vael'Koth found themselves under new rule. Some species, like the Darvoth and the Ulnari, had chosen to stand with humanity and now expected to be rewarded. Others, like the Zelvarn, were divided, some seeking peace, others preparing for resistance. The remaining Kothari warlords were still at large, refusing to surrender and rallying forces for a last stand in the outer systems. A council was formed on New Avalon, now the capital of the Dominion. A debate raged over the fate of the surviving Vael and Kothari populations. Some humans demanded their enslavement, their permanent submission to human rule. Others saw an opportunity to reshape the Galactic Order into something new. Kane, weary of war but bound by duty, faced a decision that would define humanity's legacy. 3 factions emerged within the Dominion, each offering a different vision for the future. The Dominion Imperium, led by Orion Voss and his warlords, they sought absolute human supremacy. The Alliance species would be subjugated, their planets turned into vassal states, their people made to serve humanity. "We earned this," Voss declared. "This galaxy belongs to us now." The Council of Equals, Alina Volkov and her supporters advocated for a new galactic government, one where humanity led but did not rule through oppression. They proposed incorporating former Alliance species as partners, not subjects. Victory must mean something more than conquest, Volkov urged. The isolationists, a third faction led by some of the older leaders of the United Terran Federation, argued that humanity had fought for freedom, not empire. They wanted to retreat, to abandon the conquered worlds and return home. We were never meant to be conquerors, they warned. If we do this, we will never stop. The fate of the Dominion and the entire galaxy hung in the balance. In the end, the decision fell to Admiral Lucius Kane. For years, he had fought with one goal: to secure humanity's place in the galaxy. Now that goal had been achieved. But at what cost? He had seen worlds burn. He had watched men and women fight and die under his command. He had led them to victory, but was victory alone enough? The galaxy watched as he made his choice. Would humanity rule as tyrants? Would they forge a new order? Or would they turn away from conquest altogether? On the morning of a new era, the skies of New Avalon burned with the dawn of peace or the fires of war. The war had ended, but the next battle had only just begun.